Federalist 41, Madison starts a series of papers looking at whether the criticism that the federal government gains too much power in this new constitution is correct or not, whether the states are going to lose some of the powers they've had under the Articles of Confederation. Of course, Madison says, no, the federal government, or the general government, he calls it sometimes, is not going to have too much power. All those powers are going to be enumerated. They are named, they are numbered. And also, state governments will not lose their powers. They'll have plenty of power, plenty of sovereignty left to them. There are only certain areas that the federal government is going to be in charge. And then in this particular paper, he kind of reviews or just kind of gives you a generalization of what Hamilton had done in a few papers prior to this about the common defense. Here he looks at why it's necessary for us to have a small army, kind of what Hamilton had said in a few papers. And he tells you the reasons why. One of the most important things that you want to focus on here is the fact that Madison brings this up quite a few times, that look, on the east side, we are an ocean apart from all the continent of Europe. And on the west, they didn't know, they had not, actually nobody had seen this area, none of the Americans had. So they didn't know how far this land would go. They would just find that out when Jefferson became president. He sent an expeditionary a team of two of his captains to go on expedition to the west and find out what kind of land, what kind of geography it had, what kind of animals lived there, just kind of go and find out what it was. So in this paper, Madison brings up the fact that we can be almost like a giant Britain. Look at what has helped Britain. It's an island nation. It's away from the continent of Europe. Because of that, it has had the most amount of freedom of any of those European countries, because they really don't need a big standing army. They don't need an army at all. They need a big navy. So he says, we are going to have a navy if we unite, and that is going to be so good for us in the future, because none of these European powers will be trying to challenge us. Whereas if we stay disunited, they will come and take advantage of our weakness. If we unite, it'll be exactly the opposite. So this is kind of like a review of a few of the papers that Hamilton had written prior to this one. So let me start reading it. The Constitution proposed by the Convention may be considered under two general points of view. The first relates to the sum or quantity of power which it vests in the government, including the restraints imposed on the states. The second, to the particular structure of the government and the distribution of this power among its several branches. Under the first view of the subject, two important questions arise. Whether any part of the powers transferred to the general government be unnecessary or improper. Notice general government, he means federal government. Two, whether the entire mass of them be dangerous to the portion of jurisdiction left in the several states. Is the aggregate power of the general government greater than ought to have been vested in it? This is the first question. So in this paper, he's going to focus on this part. Is the aggregate power of the general government greater than ought to have been vested in it? Have we given too much power to the federal government in this new constitution? Then he continues, it cannot have escaped those who have attended with candor to the arguments employed against the extensive powers of the government, that the authors of them have very little considered how far these powers were necessary means of attaining a necessary end. They have chosen rather to dwell on the inconveniences which must be unavoidably blended with to every power or trust to which a beneficial use can be made. This method of handling the subject cannot impose on the good sense of the people of America. It may display the subtlety of the writer. It may open a boundless field of rhetoric and declamation. It may inflame the passions of the unthinking and may confirm the prejudices of the misthinking. But cool and candid people will at once reflect that the purest of human blessings must have a portion of alloy in them, that the choice must always be made, if not of the lesser evil, at least of the greater, not the perfect. Good and I should read this again. But cool and candid people will at once reflect that the purest of human blessings must have a portion of alloy in them, that the choice must always be made, if not of the lesser evil, at least of the greater, not the perfect, good, and that in every political situation, a power to advocate the public happiness involves a discretion which may be misapplied and abused. They will see, therefore, that in all cases where power is to be conferred, the point first to be decided is whether such a power be necessary to the public good, as the next will be, in the case of an affirmative decision, to guard as effectually as possible against a perversion of the power to the public judgment. So he himself says that yes, it is at times necessary to give the government sometimes a little bit more authority than you're comfortable in doing so, because you might be afraid that the government might abuse it. But the important thing is, if you give an authority to a government, you want it to have energy, enough energy to be able to do it. So there's always this balance. You have to create a situation where the government is energetic enough, has enough authority, yet at the same time will not be able to violate it without you noticing it. And at the same time, he says, sometimes we cannot have things perfect. He talks about an alloy. Sometimes we even add impure things to pure things to make them stronger, to make them work better. So he says, with that in mind, yes, sometimes even I think that the power given to the government, some authority, might be abused. But if you don't give that government the authority, then the government cannot do its job at all. So you have to make sure that perfect and perfection does not become enemy of the good. Because if you want perfection all the time, you're going to just tie your hands and feet and not be able to do anything. So he says, I see the point. I see that we have to balance things. And he'll be the first one to say it. We will continue in the next video.